The roar of floodwater shattered the night as Lucas Gallagher awakened to find his bed floating. He scrambled for the rafters of his homestead, watching helplessly as the Rio Diablo, swollen by 3 days of relentless rain, tore through the valley and devoured everything he'd spent 5 years building. It was 1875 in the New Mexico territory, and Lucas had just lost everything. Again. By dawn's light, he stood on a ridge overlooking what had once been his ranch. The river had carved a new course straight through his land, washing away his cabin, barn, and the modest herd of cattle he'd been building. All that remained was mud, debris, and the clothes on his back. "Damn you," he whispered to the still raging waters. His calloused hands balled into fists as he surveyed the destruction. At 32, Lucas was no stranger to hardship, but this blow cut deeper than most. He'd chosen this spot carefully, believing it safe from the river's reach. The locals had warned him about building so close to the Rio Diablo, but 5 years of dry seasons had made him careless, confident. His horse, Thunder, nudged his shoulder gently. By some miracle, the animal had broken free of the corral during the night and found higher ground. At least he still had his faithful companion and the saddlebags containing his meager savings, his father's pocket watch, and his Colt revolver. "Guess we're drifters again, old friend," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. With nowhere else to go, Lucas decided to head to Cottonwood Springs, the nearest town about 15 miles east. Perhaps he could find work there, maybe even enough to start over. Again. The sun climbed higher as he rode, its heat baking the mud caking his boots and trousers. By midday, the town appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings rising from the arid landscape like scattered blocks. Cottonwood Springs wasn't much a main street with the essentials: general store, saloon, blacksmith, a small church, and a handful of other businesses. It served the surrounding ranchers and the occasional traveler passing through on the way to somewhere more important. Lucas rode slowly down the main street, drawing curious glances. A stranger always attracted attention in small towns like this, especially one covered in dried mud and looking like he'd wrestled with the devil himself. He dismounted outside the general store, tying Thunder to the hitching post. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday. Food first, then he'd figure out what came next. The bell above the door jangled as he stepped inside. The store was well stocked, shelves lined with goods from flour to fabric, tools to tobacco. Behind the counter stood a woman with her back to him, arranging jars on a shelf. "Be with you in just a moment," she called over her shoulder. Lucas removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his disheveled appearance. "Take your time, madam." At the sound of his voice, she turned. Lucas found himself looking into the brightest pair of green eyes he'd ever seen. They belonged to a woman perhaps in her mid-20s, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical bun, though a few strands had escaped to frame her face. Her simple blue dress couldn't hide her graceful figure, and when she smiled, her entire face transformed. "Good afternoon. You look like you've had quite a day already," she said, her voice warm with a hint of amusement. Lucas ran a hand through his mud-caked hair. "That obvious, is it?" "Just a bit." Her smile widened as she took in his appearance.
"I'm Lydia Mercer."
"This is my father's store, though he's laid up at home with a bad back at the moment." "Lucas Gallagher," he replied, offering a slight bow. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Mercer." Her eyes showed a flicker of recognition. "Gallagher? The one with the ranch down by the Rio Diablo?" He nodded, surprised she knew of him. "What's left of it, anyway? River had other plans for my land." Lydia's smile faded, replaced by genuine concern. "Oh, Mr. Gallagher, I'm so sorry. We heard the river jumped its banks last night. Your place was hit. Washed away completely. 5 years of work gone in a single night." He hadn't meant to sound so bitter, but the words came out sharp as nails. She came around the counter, compassion softening her features. That's terrible. Are you hurt at all? Just my pride, he said with a weak attempt at humor. And I'm mighty hungry. Could I trouble you for some supplies? I've got money. He patted the saddlebag slung over his shoulder. Of course. She busied herself gathering items: bread, dried beef, cheese, coffee. Where will you go now? Lucas shrugged. Haven't thought that far ahead yet. Need to find work, save up enough to start again. Lydia hesitated, then said, My father's been looking for help around here. With his back troubling him, he can't manage the store alone anymore, and I can't do everything. She paused. Do you know anything about running a store? Can't say that I do, Lucas admitted. Been a rancher most of my life. Before that, I rode with trail herds up from Texas. But you can read, right? Figure sums? He nodded. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. Made sure I knew my letters and numbers. That's more than many around here can say. Lydia finished gathering his supplies. Tell you what, Mr. Gallagher. Why don't you come by tomorrow morning? You can meet my father, and he can decide if there's a place for you here. Lucas hesitated. Store work wasn't what he'd imagined for himself, but beggars couldn't be choosers. That's mighty kind of you, Miss Mercer. Lydia, please. She handed him the package of food. And there's a room available at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, just down the street. Tell her I sent you. I'm obliged. He reached for his money, but she waved him off. This one's on the house. Consider it a welcome to Cottonwood Springs. Lucas's pride bristled at charity, but hunger won out. Thank you. I'll pay it back. I know you will. Something in her confident tone made him look at her more closely. There was strength in her delicate features, a determination that matched the kindness in her eyes. As he left the store, package in hand, Lucas felt something he hadn't expected: a small spark of hope. Perhaps losing everything wasn't the end after all. Perhaps it was just another beginning. Mrs. Peterson's boarding house was a 2-story white clapboard building with a wide porch and neat flower beds. The landlady herself was a robust widow in her 50s who eyed Lucas's muddy appearance with suspicion until he mentioned Lydia's name. Any friend of Lydia Mercer is welcome here, she declared, her stern expression softening. Though you'll need to clean up before you set foot on my carpets, young man. She showed him to a small but clean room on the second floor and pointed out the washroom at the end of the hall. Dinner's at 6 sharp. Don't be late. Lucas spent the afternoon washing away the mud and grime of his ordeal. As he scrubbed, he couldn't help but think about Lydia Mercer and her unexpected kindness. There was something about her that intrigued him, beyond her obvious beauty. Perhaps it was the way she'd looked at him, not with pity, but with genuine concern and a practical desire to help. Dinner at Mrs. Peterson's proved to be a lively affair. Besides Lucas, there were 3 other boarders: a young schoolteacher named Miss Wilson, an elderly gentleman who worked at the bank, and a traveling salesman passing through town. Mrs. Peterson served a hearty meal of beef stew, cornbread, and apple pie, all the while extracting Lucas's story from him with skilled questioning. Lost everything to the river, did you? She clucked sympathetically. Well, you wouldn't be the first. That Rio Diablo lives up to its name, especially in rainy years. I should have listened to the warnings, Lucas admitted. Hindsight's a cruel teacher, the elderly banker, Mr. Harding, commented. But Cottonwood Springs is a good place to start over. We look after our own here. I'm not one of your own yet, Lucas pointed out. Mrs. Peterson waved away his objection. Lydia sent you to me, so that's good enough. That girl's got the best judgment of anyone in this town. Is she from here originally? Lucas asked, trying to sound casual. The landlady shook her head. Mercers came here about 5 years ago, after Mrs. Mercer passed. Henry, that's her father, decided they needed a fresh start. Bought the general store from old man Jenkins, who was looking to retire. Best thing that ever happened to this town. Henry's fair in his dealings, and Lydia. She smiled fondly. That girl's been the heart of this community since the day she arrived. Lucas listened intently, filing away this information about the intriguing woman who'd shown him kindness when he needed it most. The next morning, Lucas presented himself at the general store, freshly shaved and wearing his cleanest shirt. The bell jangled as he entered, and this time an older man looked up from behind the counter. Though his hair was gray and his face deeply lined, Lucas could see Lydia in his features, especially around the eyes. "Mr. Gallagher, I presume?" Henry Mercer extended his hand across the counter. His grip was firm despite the pain that briefly flashed across his face as he moved. "Lydia told me about your situation. Terrible business, losing everything like that." "Yes, sir. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you about work." Henry studied him for a moment. "Ever worked in a store before?"
No, sir.
"Been ranching most of my life." The older man rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Not much similarity between herding cattle and stocking shelves. "No, sir, but I'm a quick learner and not afraid of hard work." "That counts for something." Henry nodded. "Can you handle figures?" "We need to keep accurate accounts." My mother made sure I could cipher well enough. The door opened, and Lydia entered, carrying a basket. Her face brightened when she saw Lucas. "Mr. Gallagher, you came?" "Said I would, Miss Mercer." "Lydia," she corrected him with a smile. To her father, she said, "I've brought your lunch, and there's enough for Mr. Gallagher too if he's staying." Henry looked from his daughter to Lucas and back again. Something in Lydia's expression seemed to make up his mind. "Well, I suppose we could use the help, especially with the heavy lifting. My back's not what it used to be." "Does that mean I have the job, sir?" "Let's call it a trial. 2 weeks. See how you take to it." Henry extended his hand again. $5 a week to start, plus room and board at Mrs. Peterson's. I'll settle that with her." Lucas shook his hand. "That's more than fair, Mr. Mercer. I won't let you down." "See that you don't." There was a warning in the older man's tone, but his eyes were kind. "Now, let's have that lunch Lydia brought, and then I'll show you what needs doing around here." Over the next 2 weeks, Lucas threw himself into learning the business of the general store. Though it was different from anything he'd done before, he found he had a knack for organization and inventory. His strength came in handy for unloading deliveries and rearranging heavy merchandise, tasks that clearly pained Henry to attempt. More importantly, he enjoyed working alongside Lydia. She was intelligent, practical, and had a quick wit that often caught him by surprise. She knew every customer by name and remembered their preferences, their families, their troubles and joys. People came to the store not just for goods, but for Lydia's warm smile and genuine interest in their lives. As they worked together, Lucas found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, admiring the graceful way she moved, the kindness she showed to everyone who entered the store. Sometimes he caught her watching him too, a thoughtful expression in those remarkable green eyes. One evening, after closing the store, Lydia invited him to join her and her father for dinner at their home, a modest but comfortable house behind the store. "I hope you don't mind a simple meal," she said as she led him through the back door of the store that connected to their residence. "I'm not the most accomplished cook. After years of my own trail cooking, anything you make will taste like a feast," Lucas assured her. The Mercer's home was neat and cozy, with a small parlor containing well-worn furniture and bookshelves lining one wall. Lucas noticed several framed daguerreotypes on the mantel. Lydia as a child with her parents, Henry and a woman who must have been his wife on their wedding day, and a more recent one of Lydia alone, her expression serene. Dinner was indeed simple: chicken and dumplings, fresh bread, and vegetables from Lydia's garden, but delicious. The conversation flowed easily, with Henry sharing stories of his younger days in Pennsylvania before moving west. "What about you, Lucas?" Henry asked. "What brought you to these parts?" Lucas took a sip of water, considering his answer. "Restlessness, I suppose." After the war, I couldn't settle back into my old life in Texas. Rode with trail herds for a few years, then decided I wanted land of my own. He shrugged. Saved every penny, bought that place by the river, thought I was finally building something permanent. And now? Lydia asked softly. He met her eyes across the table. Now I'm learning that maybe permanence isn't about the land or buildings. Maybe it's about finding a place where you fit, where what you do matters. Henry nodded approvingly. Wise words for a man your age. After dinner, Henry excused himself, claiming his back was troubling him. Lucas suspected the older man was deliberately giving him time alone with Lydia, a thought both alarming and pleasing. Would you like to sit on the porch for a while? Lydia asked. The evenings are so pleasant this time of year. They sat side by side in rocking chairs, watching as twilight deepened into night. Fireflies began to dance in the garden, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Do you miss it? Lydia asked suddenly. Your ranch, I mean. Lucas considered the question. I miss what it represented: independence, a future I was building with my own two hands. But the land itself. He shook his head. It was just land. Pretty enough, but not special. And will you try again? Find another plot of land. Build another ranch. He turned to look at her, her profile illuminated by the soft glow from the parlor windows. I'm not sure anymore. These past 2 weeks. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I've come to appreciate different things. The rhythm of the store, the people of this town, working alongside you and your father. Lydia smiled, still gazing out at the darkening garden. I've enjoyed having you here too, Lucas. Father seems better with you around. The pain doesn't trouble him as much when he's not trying to do everything himself. He's a good man. You both are good people. Lucas hesitated, then added, I've been meaning to thank you properly. For that day when I first came into the store. You could have just sold me supplies and sent me on my way, but you offered more than that. You offered a chance. Now she turned to face him, her expression earnest in the dim light. It wasn't charity, if that's what you're thinking. Father really does need the help, and you've proven to be exactly what we needed. Still, not everyone would have looked at a mud-covered stranger and seen anything worth salvaging. Lydia's laugh was soft and musical. Perhaps I have a gift for seeing the value in things others might overlook. She stood, smoothing her skirts. It's getting late. I should check on Father. Lucas rose as well. Of course. Thank you for dinner. It was the best meal I've had in longer than I can remember. As he turned to leave, she touched his arm lightly. Lucas, I'm glad the river brought you to us, even if that wasn't its intention. Her words stayed with him as he walked back to the boarding house, replaying in his mind like a favorite melody. For the first time since the flood, he felt a sense of gratitude toward the Rio Diablo. Perhaps losing everything had led him exactly where he needed to be. The next morning, Lucas arrived at the store early, eager to begin the day's work. As he approached, he saw a man hammering a notice to the post outside. Curious, he paused to read it. Land for sale, 100 acres. Water rights included. Inquire at First Bank of Cottonwood Springs. The land in question was just north of town, prime grazing territory according to the description. Lucas felt a familiar stirring of interest. Land of his own again, wasn't that what he wanted? Morning, Mr. Gallagher. The man tipped his hat. Name's Peterson, Mrs. Peterson's nephew. I work at the bank. Saw you reading our notice there. Good land? Lucas asked, nodding toward the paper. Best available in these parts. Owner's moving to California. Wants a quick sale. Peterson lowered his voice confidentially. Between you and me, there's a railroad survey crew in the area. Rumor has it they're planning a line through the territory. Land values could double, triple even, if the railroad comes through. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. Something to consider. Banks offering favorable terms to the right buyer. Peterson tipped his hat again. Think about it, Mr. Gallagher. Opportunity doesn't knock twice. As Peterson walked away, Lucas continued staring at the notice. 100 acres with water rights. It was tempting. Very tempting. The bell jangled as he entered the store, finding Lydia already arranging a new display of fabric. "Good morning," she called cheerfully. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," he replied, distracted by thoughts of the land for sale. She studied his face. "You look preoccupied. Is something wrong?" Lucas hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "There's land for sale north of town. Good land, from what Peterson at the bank says."
Ah.
A flicker of something disappointment crossed her face before she composed herself. "The old Jenkins place. It is good land. Are you thinking of buying it?" "It crossed my mind," he admitted. "It's what I came here to do, after all. Have my own spread." "Of course." Lydia turned back to her fabric display, her movements more brisk than before. "You'd be foolish not to at least look into it." Before Lucas could respond, the door opened and customers began streaming in. The morning rush had begun, and personal conversations would have to wait. Throughout the day, Lucas found himself watching Lydia more closely than usual. There was a new reserve in her manner toward him, a careful politeness that hadn't been there before. It bothered him more than he cared to admit. That afternoon, during a lull in business, Henry called Lucas into the small office at the back of the store. "Lydia tells me you're considering buying the Jenkins property," the older man said, without preamble. Lucas nodded. "I'm thinking about it. Ranching is what I know." Henry leaned back in his chair, wincing slightly at the movement. "It's good land. Old Jenkins did well there until his rheumatism got too bad for ranch work." He studied Lucas thoughtfully. "You've been a big help around here these past weeks. Hate to lose you." "I appreciate that, sir. But a man has to follow his own path," Henry continued. "If ranching is yours, then you should pursue it." Lucas felt oddly deflated by Henry's acceptance. Part of him had hoped the older man might offer more reasons to stay. "Just one thing," Henry added, his tone serious. "Before you make any decisions, be clear about what you really want. Sometimes we chase after what we think we should want, rather than what truly matters to us." The older man's words haunted Lucas as he worked through the afternoon. What did he truly want? The answer had seemed so clear before: land, cattle, a ranch of his own. The independence of answering to no one but himself, and the satisfaction of building something lasting. But these past weeks had shown him another kind of satisfaction: the pleasure of being part of a community, of working alongside people he respected, of seeing Lydia's smile each morning when he arrived at the store. Was he ready to give that up? After closing time, Lucas decided to walk out to the Jenkins property to see it for himself. He borrowed a horse from the livery stable and rode north out of town. The land, when he reached it, was indeed impressive: rolling hills with good grass, a clear stream cutting through one corner, and enough flat terrain for building a house and barn. It was everything he should want. As he stood on a rise overlooking the property, Lucas tried to picture himself there, building a new life. Oddly, the image wouldn't quite form in his mind. Instead, he kept seeing Lydia's face when he'd mentioned the land that morning, that brief flash of disappointment before she'd hidden it away. On his ride back to town, Lucas took a detour to visit what remained of his old ranch. The river had receded to its normal course, leaving behind a swath of destruction. His cabin was completely gone, the barn just a few broken timbers. Even the corral had been washed away. It was as if he'd never been there at all. Strangely, the sight didn't fill him with the grief or anger he'd expected. Instead, he felt a sense of closure. That chapter of his life was over, washed away by the river's fury, making space for something new. By the time he returned to Cottonwood Springs, night had fallen. Lights glowed in windows along the main street, and from the saloon came the sounds of a piano and raucous laughter. Lucas returned the horse to the livery stable and headed not toward Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, but to the Mercer's home. A lamp still burned in the parlor window. He hesitated, then knocked softly on the door. After a moment, Lydia opened it, surprise registering on her face. "Lucas, is everything all right?" "I'm sorry for calling so late," he said, removing his hat. "But I needed to speak with you." She glanced over her shoulder into the house. "Father's already gone to bed. Would you like to sit on the porch?" They settled into the rocking chairs as they had the night before. The air was cool but pleasant, scented with night-blooming jasmine from Lydia's garden. "I went to see the Jenkins property today," Lucas began. "Oh." Her voice was carefully neutral. "And what did you think?" "It's fine land. Everything a rancher could want." Lydia nodded, her eyes fixed on some distant point in the darkness. "Will you buy it then?" Lucas took a deep breath.
No.
Her head turned sharply. "No?
But why?
I thought it was what you wanted." "So did I," he admitted. "But I've been doing some thinking about what I really want, what truly matters." In the dim light from the parlor window, he could see her watching him intently, waiting. "5 years ago, I thought land was the answer. A place of my own, where I could put down roots. But the river taught me that land can be taken away in a single night." He leaned forward in his chair, closer to her. "What can't be washed away are the connections we make with other people. The sense of belonging somewhere, being part of something. And do you feel that here?" "In Cottonwood Springs." Her voice was soft, tentative. "I'm beginning to," he said honestly. "Your father's given me a chance to prove myself. The people here have been kind, welcoming. And you." He paused, gathering his courage. "You saw something in me worth salvaging when I was at my lowest. That means more than any parcel of land ever could." Lydia's eyes shimmered in the lamplight. "I saw a good man who'd suffered a loss. Nothing more complicated than that." "Maybe so, but you offered me more than shelter or work. You offered me a new beginning." Lucas stood, moving to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand in his. "I don't want to leave, Lydia. Not to buy that land, not to build another ranch that might wash away. I want to stay here, in this town, working in your father's store, working alongside you." Her fingers tightened around his. "Lucas, are you certain? I wouldn't want you to give up your dreams and regret it later." "My dreams have changed," he said simply. "Or maybe they're just clearer now. I thought I wanted independence, but what I really want is to belong somewhere. With someone." A single tear slipped down Lydia's cheek. "I was so afraid you would leave. When you mentioned the land this morning, I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. These past weeks, having you here." She smiled through her tears. "I've never met anyone like you, Lucas Gallagher." He reached up to brush away her tear with his thumb. "May I call on you properly, Miss Mercer?" "With your father's permission, of course." Her smile widened. "I believe he would approve. He's grown quite fond of you." "And you?" Lucas asked softly. "Have you grown fond of me too?" In answer, Lydia leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but full of promise, sweet as spring water to a man who'd been dying of thirst without knowing it. When they broke apart, Lucas felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, stronger than he'd ever felt on his own land. The river had taken his homestead, but in doing so, it had led him here, to this woman, this town, this new beginning. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's late, and there's work to be done in the morning." Lydia nodded, but held his hand a moment longer. "Lucas? I'm glad you're staying." "So am I," he replied, meaning it with all his heart. The next day, Lucas spoke with Henry, formally asking permission to court Lydia. The older man seemed unsurprised by the request and gave his blessing with a firm handshake and a warning. "She's my only child, Lucas." Her happiness means everything to me. I understand, sir. I'll do my best to be worthy of her. Henry's stern expression softened. I believe you will. Now, about the store, I've been thinking. If you're serious about staying, I'd like to discuss a more permanent arrangement. Perhaps even a partnership, eventually. Lucas was taken aback by the offer. That's generous of you, Mr. Mercer. But I don't have the capital to buy into a business. There are other ways to earn a stake. Henry tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the desk. I'm not getting any younger, and this back of mine isn't improving. I need someone I can trust to help run things, someone with a long-term interest in the business. Someone like a son-in-law, perhaps, in time. Lucas felt his face grow warm. Sir, I've only just asked to court your daughter. It's a bit early to speak of. Henry waved away his protests with a chuckle. I've seen how you two look at each other. I wasn't born yesterday. His expression grew serious again. Think about it. That's all I'm saying. The offer stands, regardless of what happens between you and Lydia. You've proven yourself a hard worker and quick learner. That's worth more than money to me.
Thank you, sir.
I will think about it. As spring turned to summer, Lucas and Lydia's courtship blossomed under the approving eyes of Cottonwood Springs. They attended church together on Sundays, joined community picnics, and spent quiet evenings on the Mercer's porch, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas found himself falling deeper in love with her each day. He loved her kindness, her practical intelligence, the way she hummed softly while arranging merchandise, the determined set of her chin when negotiating with traveling salesmen. He loved how she remembered every customer's name and asked after their families, how she slipped extra candy to the children who came into the store, how she could calm an angry drunk with just a few quiet words. For her part, Lydia seemed equally smitten. She confessed one evening that she'd noticed him long before the flood. You came into town maybe once a month for supplies, she told him as they walked along the creek that ran behind the church. Always so polite, but a bit distant. I used to wonder what you were thinking behind those serious blue eyes. Lucas laughed. Probably wondering if I had enough fence posts, or if my cattle had enough grazing. You never seemed to notice me, she teased. I noticed, he admitted. But I didn't think I had anything to offer someone like you. I was still building my place, still proving myself. And now... She looked up at him, her green eyes dancing with mischief. Now I know that what I have to offer has nothing to do with land or cattle. He stopped walking, turning to face her. It's just me, Lydia. My heart, my hands, my promise to cherish you always. Her expression softened. That's all I've ever wanted, Lucas. He kissed her then, by the creek with the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In that moment, Lucas couldn't imagine wanting anything more than this woman, this life they were beginning to build together. As summer waned, news reached Cottonwood Springs that the railroad survey was indeed planning a route through the territory, with the town slated for a station. The news sent a wave of excitement through the community. A railroad would bring growth, commerce, opportunity. We'll need to expand the store, Henry mused one evening as they closed up. Order more inventory, perhaps hire additional help. Lucas nodded, already thinking about the logistics. The back storeroom could be expanded into that empty lot behind us. We could double our storage capacity. Good thinking. Henry clapped him on the shoulder. See, this is why I want you as a partner. You've got a head for business. The mention of partnership reminded Lucas of something he'd been meaning to discuss with the older man. About that, sir. I've been saving most of my wages. It's not much yet, but I'd like to formally accept your offer. I want to invest in the store, build something here. Henry's face broke into a wide smile. That's the best news I've heard all day. We'll draw up the papers next week. He hesitated, then added, Have you spoken to Lydia yet? About your intentions? Lucas felt a flutter of nervousness. Not formally, no. But I've been saving for another purpose as well. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. I ordered this from Denver. It arrived yesterday. Inside the box was a delicate gold ring with a small emerald, the color of Lydia's eyes. It had cost nearly all his savings, but Lucas knew it was worth every penny. Henry examined the ring, then handed it back with approval in his eyes. She'll love it. When do you plan to ask her? Tonight, if that meets with your approval. You have my blessing, son. Henry's voice was gruff with emotion. You've made this old man very happy. That evening, Lucas took Lydia for a walk to the same spot by the creek where they'd shared that perfect kiss in early summer. The air was cooler now, with the first hint of autumn, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I've been thinking about the future, Lucas said as they stood by the water. About what I want, where I belong. Lydia looked up at him, her face gentle in the twilight. And what conclusions have you reached, Mr. Gallagher? He took both her hands in his. That I belong wherever you are. That I want a future with you by my side. Slowly, he knelt before her, still holding her hands. Lydia Mercer, you gave me a place in your heart when I had lost everything else. Would you do me the greatest honor of becoming my wife? Tears sprang to her eyes as he presented the ring. Oh, Lucas.
Yes.
1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Lucas felt a sense of completion, of rightness that surpassed anything he'd ever known. The river had washed away his homestead, but it had carried him here, to this woman, this love, this future bright with promise. Their wedding took place in Cottonwood Springs' small church on a crisp October day. The entire town turned out for the occasion, filling the pews and spilling onto the church steps. Lydia was radiant in a cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself, carrying a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. As they exchanged vows, Lucas looked into her eyes and saw his whole world reflected there. Not land or cattle or buildings that could be washed away, but something permanent, enduring, built on love and trust and shared dreams. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher declared. You may kiss your bride. The crowd erupted in cheers as Lucas took Lydia in his arms, sealing their union with a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. The railroad arrived in Cottonwood Springs the following spring, bringing with it the growth Henry had predicted. The town expanded, new businesses opened, and Mercer and Gallagher General Store, as it was now called, thrived. Lucas and Lydia worked side by side, their partnership in business as strong as their partnership in life. They built a small house on the edge of town, with a garden for Lydia and a stable for Thunder, and the mare Lucas had given her as a wedding gift. It wasn't a grand ranch, but it was theirs, and it was filled with love. One evening, a year after their wedding, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Lydia took Lucas's hand and placed it on her stomach. I have news, she said, her eyes shining. We're going to have a baby. Joy unlike anything he'd ever known flooded through Lucas. He gathered his wife into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world which, to him, she was. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. For what? She asked, nestling against his chest. For everything. For seeing something worth salvaging in a mud-covered cowboy. For giving me a home when the river took mine. For loving me. She pulled back to look into his eyes, her hand cupping his cheek. The river didn't take your home, Lucas. It just washed away a house. Your home is here now with me. With our family. As twilight deepened into night, Lucas held his wife close, marveling at how losing everything had led him to gain so much more. The river had changed course, and in doing so, had changed the course of his life. For that, he would be forever grateful. 5 years later, Lucas stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Lydia in the garden with their children 4-year-old Henry and 2-year-old Emma. His son's laughter rang out as he chased a butterfly, while his daughter toddled after her brother on unsteady legs. The town had grown considerably, with the railroad bringing prosperity to Cottonwood Springs. Mercer and Gallagher General Store had expanded too, now occupying 3 storefronts on Main Street. Old Henry, though slowed by age, still came in most days, delighting in telling customers that his son-in-law had the best business sense in the territory. Occasionally, when riding the expanded property they now owned at the edge of town, Lucas would think about his old ranch by the Rio Diablo. The river had carved a new path, just as life had carved a new path for him. He never regretted losing that land, for in its place, he'd found something far more valuable, a love that couldn't be washed away, a family that was his true home, and a future built on something more enduring than any piece of earth. As if sensing his thoughts, Lydia looked up from the garden and smiled at him, that same smile that had first captured his heart in a general store when he had nothing but the clothes on his back and a desperate need for a new beginning. Lucas smiled back, filled with gratitude for the river that had taken his homestead but led him to where he truly belonged, in the heart of the woman who had seen his worth when he thought he had nothing left to offer. "Papa, come see," little Henry called, holding up a colorful stone he'd found. Lucas descended the porch steps and joined his family in the garden, kneeling beside his son to admire the treasure. Emma climbed into his lap, sticky hands patting his cheeks, while Lydia rested her hand on his shoulder, her touch as warm and reassuring as the first day she'd offered him hope. This, he thought, was what it meant to be truly home. Not a piece of land that could be lost to a river's fury, but the love of a family that nothing could wash away.